Hi guys, how is everyone? It's a Wednesday, which is a decent day. um, Thursday is my personal favorite day, but Wednesday's okay. Um, I hope everyone's doing okay. Feel free to let me know. Love hearing from people. We are going to go ahead and jump into the book, which I'm pretty stoked about because has been quite a few weeks. And I remember in the last chapter, at the end of part 1, there was a funeral, I believe, for one of the crew members on the Nautilus. And I remember that Captain Nemo took Arana and Conseil and Ned Land basically to walk along the surface of the ocean, or the surface of the I'm sorry, like the bottom of the ocean, or I guess, I don't know, I forget where they are, the coral reefs, and bury this body. And I remember it was a very touching scene. So yes, so in the end of part 1, it says, that is our peaceful cemetery, hundreds of feet below the surface of the waters. Your dead sleep quietly there, Captain, well beyond the reach of sharks. Yes, Monsieur, Captain Nemo replied gravely, beyond the reach of sharks and of men. Another strange comment from Nemo, which seems to be a bit of a recurring topic, these sort of strange things being said by Captain Nemo. Okay, so let's continue on and see what happens in the next part. Okay, so part 2, chapter 1 is called The Indian Ocean. Just gonna see how long this chapter is. 217. Okay, 10 pages. We now begin the second stage of our journey under the sea. The first had ended with that moving scene in the coral graveyard, which had made such a deep impression in my mind. It was now evident that the life of Captain Nemo was destined to be spent in the bottom of those immense oceans, that he had prepared his grave in the most inaccessible depths of the sea. Move this toward me a little bit. No sea monster would ever trouble his sleep there, nor the sleep of his crew, friends bound to each other in death as well as life. Nor would they ever be disturbed by men, he had added. Always there were the same fierce, implacable defiance of human society. I was no longer satisfied with Conseil's theory. That worthy lad still felt like that the commander of the Nautilus was one of those unrecognized scientists, spurned by the society whose difference they repaid with contempt and hatred. For Conseil, the captain was still a misunderstood genius who, weary of his world's deceptions, had sought refuge in those inaccessible regions where his nature could have free play. In my opinion, this theory explained only one aspect in the life of Captain Nemo: the mysterious incidents of the night when we had been drugged and imprisoned, the violence with which he had snatched that telescope from my eyes to prevent me from scanning the horizon, the mortal wound inflicted upon the member of the crew by an unexplained collision of the Nautilus. All this led me to re-examine my thoughts. No, Captain Nemo was not satisfied merely to flee humanity. His formidable craft served to satisfy not only his yearning for freedom, but also perhaps an intense desire for vengeance. At that moment, nothing was very clear in my mind. Only faint glimmers of light stood out from the mysterious background of that strange man, and I could describe my thoughts only as they were shaped by the events themselves. Nothing bound us to Captain Nemo. He knew it was possible for us to escape from the Nautilus. We were not honor bound to remain on board. We were merely captives, only prisoners disguised as guests through a pretense of courtesy. However, Ned Land had not given up hope of regaining his freedom. There was no question that he would take advantage of the first opportunity to escape. Undoubtedly, I would do the same. Nevertheless, I would not have escaped without a pang of regret, for the captain, in his generosity, had permitted us to share the mysteries of the Nautilus. Should we hate or admire this man? Was he a victim of circumstance or an executioner? To be perfectly frank, I did not wish to finish his underwater journey around the world, which we had begun so magnificently before leaving him forever. I did want to see all those marbles accumulated beneath the waters of the world. I did want to see what no man had ever seen before, even if I might pay for my insatiable thirst for knowledge with my life. What had I learned so far? Nothing, or almost nothing, since we had traveled so far, only 6,000 leagues across the Pacific. I realized, moreover, that the Nautilus was approaching inhabited lands, and that if an opportunity to escape were to arise, it would be cruel to sacrifice my companions because of my passion for the unknown. I would have to follow them, perhaps even guide them. But would such an opportunity ever present itself? I, as an individual deprived of his free will, longed for such an occasion, of course, but the scientist in me, curious for knowledge, dreaded it. On that day, January 21st, at noon, the second in command came up to the platform. Hi, Colin. Came up to the platform to take our position. I went up also. I lit a cigar and I watched him as he carried out his work. It was obvious that he knew no French because on several occasions I passed remarks loud enough to evoke a reaction. If he understood them, he remained silent and impassive. When he was looking through his sextant, one of the sailors, the powerful-looking man who had accompanied us for our first excursion in the Isle of Crespo, came to clean the glass panes of the searchlight. I took the opportunity to examine the setup of the instrument, whose power was increased 100-fold by the use of ringed lenses arranged like those of a lighthouse to throw its intensive light in any direction. The electric device was so designed as to give the maximum amount of light. In fact, it worked like a vacuum, which ensured both intensity and stability. The vacuum gave a longer life to the graphite points of either extremity of the electric arc, something important for Captain Nemo, who could not have replaced them too easily. However, under these conditions, the wear and tear was almost negligible. When the Nautilus was ready to submerge again, I went back to the saloon. The hatches were closed and our course was set due west. We were then sailing through the waters of the Indian Ocean, that vast expanse of liquid with the area of 1,200,000 acres. No, 1,200,000,000 acres, whose waters was so clear that anyone peering down into their depths felt giddy. Sorry, I don't know why that number was hard for me to understand for a second. The Nautilus cruised at a depth of somewhere between 300 and 600 feet and went along like this for several days. To anyone who did not have any love for the sea, the hours would have seemed endless and boring. My daily walks on the platform, breathing and the invigorating air of the sea, the sight of those teeming waters seen through the panels of the saloon, the wealth of books in the library, and the writing in my notes took all the time that left me not a moment to lassitude and boredom. Of lassitude and boredom. We all managed to keep in excellent health. The food on board agreed with us, and as far as I was concerned, we could have easily dispensed with those variations Ned Land ingeniously and in spirit of protest managed to procure. Moreover, in such a constant temperature, we didn't even run the risk of catching colds. Besides the Madreporia denophilia, known in Providence as sea fennel, in which there was a good supply on board, which would have given us an effective cough remedy when mixed with the juicy flesh of its polyps. For several days we saw great numbers of aquatic birds, palmadids, sea mews, or gulls. Some were shot down with great skill, and when prepared in a certain manner, furnished us with a very pleasant dish. Among the large winged birds, far from land, which rest on the crest of the waves when tired, I saw some magnificent albatrosses, birds belonging to the family of longipenets, whose harsh cries resemble the braying of an ass. The family of tatapomates were represented by the swift-flying frigate birds, which snatched fish swimming near the surface, and by numerous phaetons, or tropic birds, including the red-striped phaeton, the size of a pigeon, whose plumage, shaded in pink, contrasts widely with its black wings. The nets cast by the Nautilus brought up several kinds of sea turtles, mainly the hawkbill variety, with their dome-like back and very valuable shell. These reptiles, which dive easily, can remain underwater for a long time, merely by closing a fleshy valve located in the external orifice of their nasal passage. Some of them were asleep in their shells when caught. Their shells protect them from the ravages of other animals. The flesh of these animals was generally mediocre, but their eggs provided us with a regal dish. As for the fish, they always filled us with a great admiration when we, standing at the open panels, pried into the secrets of their aquatic life. I noticed several species that I had never observed before. I shall mention principally the Osteichthyus and trunkfish peculiar to the Red Sea, the Indian Ocean, and the waters that bathe the coast of South America. These fish, like the turtle, the armadillo, the sea urchin, and the shellfish, are protected by a hard shell that is neither chalky nor stony, but made of real bone, sometimes in the shape of a triangle, sometimes in the shape of a square. Among the triangle variety, I observed some were about 2 inches long, with a brown tail and yellow fins, whose flesh is both healthy and exquisite. I suggest that these acclimatized to fresh water, a change that some sea fish can easily undergo. I shall cite also some quadrangular trunkfish with 4 large tubercles on their back, trunkfish with white flecks on their bellies, which can be trained like birds, trigonae, armed with spines formed with an external growth of bony shell and whose peculiar grunts have given them the name sea pigs, dromedaries with large conical humps whose flesh is hard and leathery. I'm gonna take a sip of my tea. So good. Okay. From the daily notes of Conceal, I would like to add certain fish of the genus Tetradon, peculiar to these waters. Spengalerans, red-backed with white-chested, with 3 rows of longitudinal filaments, and electric tetradons, 7 inches long and very brightly colored. Then, amongst specimens of other genera, ovioids that resemble a brown-black egg and have white stripes and no tail, didodons, porcupines of the sea, armed with spikes, capable of inflating themselves until they look like a ball covered with spikes, seahorses, common to all seas, the long-snouted pegasus, whose pectoral fins are wing-shaped, enabling it, if not to fly, at least to leap into the air, pigeon spatulae, whose tails are covered with shelly rings, macronathae, bright-colored fish with jaws 10 inches long, livid calamores with rough-shaped heads, myriads of jumping blennies, black-striped with long pectoral fins, gliding among the surface with fantastic speed. Delicious velifera, who can lift their fins like sails to catch favorable currents, splendid curtidae, arrayed in yellow, sky blue, silver, and gold, trichiperta, whose wings are formed in filaments. Bullheads with lemon silver is supposed to be dangerous to lemon colored spots making hissing noises. Gurnards, whose liver is supposed to be dangerous to eat. Greenlings with flaps over their eyes, and finally, bellowsfish with long tubular muzzles, true flycatchers of the sea, armed with a gun, undreamed of by the chassepats of the Remingtons, who can kill an insect by hitting it with a drop of water. My gosh, these paragraphs that are just nautical creatures over and over again. It's like such a mouthful. Of the 89th genus of fishes as classified by Lacepidae, belonging to the second subclass of bony fish, categorized by the opercula and bronchial membranes, I noticed the scorpion fish, having a spiked head and 1 dorsal fin, whose creatures may not be covered with small scales depending on their subgenus. The second subgenus included specimens of Didicalacta, 13 or 15 inches long, with yellow-striped, fantastic-looking heads. The first subgenus provides specimens of that bizarre fish justly called toadfish, with a large head, sometimes swollen with protuberances, bristling with spikes, and covered with nodules. Its hideous thorns, its callous hide, and its poisonous sting make it both dangerous and a most repulsive creature. From the 21st to the 23rd of January, the Nautilus sailed at a rate of 250 leagues every 24 hours, or 540 miles a day, averaging about 22 nautical miles per hour. We were able to identify various kinds of fish because they were attracted to the electric light and sought to accompany us. Most of them, however, could not keep up with our speed and were left behind. Some of them, one of the other hand, managed to swim side by side with the Nautilus for some time. On the morning of the 24th, in latitude 12 degrees 5 south by longitude 94 degrees 33, we sighted Keeling Island, a madreportal formation formed with magnificent coconut palms, which had been visited by Charles Darwin and Captain Fitzroy. The Nautilus sailed past this desert land only a short distance from its shores, while the nets dragged up numerous specimens of polyps and echinoderms, as well as curious mollusks. Captain Nemo's store of precious exhibits with further was further enhanced by various types of miniature dolphin, to which I added a spiny starfish, a kind of polyp parasite which attached to a shell. Very soon, Keeling Island disappeared below the horizon, and our course was set northwest toward the tip of the Indian Peninsula. "These are civilized countries," Ned Land remarked to me that day. "Better than those Papuan islands, where you meet those savages, more savages than deer. In India, Professor, there are roads, railways, and English, French, and Hindu towns. You couldn't go 5 miles without needing a fellow countryman. Don't you think the time has come to bid Captain Nemo a courteous farewell?" "No, Ned, no," I replied in a very distinctive tone of voice. "Let things ride, as you sailors say. The Nautilus is approaching populated countries. She is heading toward Europe. Just let her take us there. Once we reach home waters, we shall see what the wisest thing to do. However, I don't imagine that Captain Nemo will permit us to go hunting on the coasts of Malabar or Coromandel, as he did in the jungle of New Guinea." "But don't you think, monsieur, that we might act on our own without his permission?" I did not answer the Canadian because I preferred to avoid an argument. At heart, I really wished to follow to that very end of the adventures that destiny held in store for us aboard the Nautilus. After leaving Keeling Island, we slowed down and traveled at random, but often diving down to great depths. On several occasions, using those side fins that could be set at an angle, we reached depths of 2 or 3 miles. However, we never plummeted the lowest depths of the Indian Ocean, which even surroundings of over 40,000 feet have so far failed to do. The temperature at these lower strata is constant, and the thermometer generally registered at 4 degrees above 0°C, or 39 degrees Fahrenheit. I observed also that the upper strata were always colder in shallow waters than in the open sea. On the 25th of January, the ocean was completely deserted, and the Nautilus spent all day on the surface, thrashing the waves with her powerful propeller and splashing water up at a great height. Who would not have taken her for a gigantic crustacean under these conditions? I spent 3/4 of that day on the platform, gazing at the sea. Nothing appeared on the horizon until about 4 o'clock in the evening, when a long streamer, plowing its way westward in the opposite direction, appeared on the horizon. I caught a glimpse of her masts in an instant, but she could not have seen the Nautilus, which did not rise much above the water. I imagined this boat belonged to the P&O line, which plies between Keyron and Sydney, calling it King George's Point, and at Melbourne. At 5 o'clock in the evening, not long before the very brief twilight that occurs between day and night at the tropics, Conseil and I were astonished by a strange sight. There was a charming creature which, according to the ancients, brings good fortune if it crosses one's path. Aristotle, Athenaeus, Pliny, and Oppianus had studied its habits, and had written poetically about it in Greek and in Latin. They called it the Nautilus or the Pamalimeus. But in modern science, this mollusk is now known as the Argonaut. If anyone interested in the subject had consulted Conseil, that worthy lad would have informed him that the division of mollusks comprises 5 classes. The first class, that of cephalods, which are sometimes naked and sometimes covered with a shell, consists of 2 families, the Dibracata and the Tetrapanachiata, which are distinguished by the number of their gills. The family of Dibracata I'm so sorry. Di Dibranchiata comprises three species: the argonaut, the squid, and the cuttlefish. And the family of the Tetrabranchiata consists of but one species, the nautilus. It would be inexcusable if, after being treated by all this terminology, an obdurate listener insisted on confusing the argonaut, which is equipped with suckers or siphons, with the nautilus, which has tentacles. And indeed, what we now saw was a school of argonauts traveling along the surface of the ocean. We counted several hundred of them. They belonged to the tubersole species peculiar to the Indian seas. These grateful mollusks moved backwards by sucking in water and expelling it again through the pulposular tubes. Of their 8 tentacles, 6 were long and thin and floated on the surface, while the other 2 were rounded like palm leaves and held up in the wind like light sails. That's so cool. There's an asterisk there. And it says, Verne was reflecting here the view of his time, now known to be incorrect. The 2 arms, he says, are held up like 8 sails actually clasp the shell. Only the female inhabits a shell where she lays her eggs and is free to come and go. You know, these footnotes really tell you how much work it must have been to be an editor and to fact check all of these different terms that are showing up in the story. So yeah, really cool. I'm gonna take a sippy. Okay, let's get back into it. I could clearly see their spiraled shells, which Cuvier had justly compared to elegant scriffs. And indeed, the shell is a boat, for the creature whom it carries has created it, but it is not attached to it. The argonaut is free to leave its shell if it wants to, I told Conseil, but it never does. That's just like Captain Nemo, Conseil remarked wisely. He would have done better, perhaps, to have called his ship the Argonaut. For about an hour, the Nautilus was surrounded by this school of mollusks. Then, suddenly, I do not know what fear possessed them, as if it was a signal, they suddenly furled their shells, withdrew their arms, their bodies contracted, and their shells turned over. Shifting their centers of gravity, the whole flotilla disappeared beneath the water. It all happened in a flash, and no naval squadron had ever executed such a precise maneuver. Just then, night fell suddenly, and the waves, scarcely touched by the light breeze, lay quietly around the Nautilus. The next day, the 26th of January, we crossed the equator at the 82nd meridian and re-entered the northern hemisphere. All that day we were escorted by a formidable school of sharks, fearful creatures that abound these waters and render them extremely perilous. They were Phillips sharks, with brown backs and whitish bellies, armed with 11 rows of teeth. Eyed sharks, whose necks are marked with big black spot encircled with white, resembling an eye, and Isabella sharks, with rounded snouts and dotted with dark spots. These powerful animals often hurled themselves against the glass panes of the saloon so violently that we felt quite unsafe. Ned Land could no longer contain his anger. He wanted to surface and harpoon these monsters. He was especially excited by the dogfish sharks, whose mouths were surrounded with teeth resembling a mosaic. But the big tiger sharks, which were about 15 feet long, were soon the Nautilus 15 feet long. But soon the Nautilus increased her speed and left the swiftest of them behind with no difficulty. On the 27th of January, as the entrance to the West Bay of Bengal, we occasionally saw corpses floating on the surface. These were the dead of Indian towns, carried out by the sea to the sea by the Ganges. I've heard about this. That's so interesting that it pops up in the book because my parents went on a trip to India and they were telling me that people, like, because the Ganges is known to be like such a religious river, in India, people try to, when they die, and end up in the Ganges. And I don't know if they still do this today, but like people would often put their dead in the Ganges as a religious symbol. So that's so interesting that that popped up in the book because I've like heard of that before. Anyway, the vultures, the only undertakers in that country, had not been able to devour them completely. However, the sharks could be relied upon to finish the grisly task. So crazy. Wow. Anyway, at about 7 o'clock in the evening, the Nautilus was half submerged and seemed to be sailing through a milk-colored sea. As far as the eye could see, the ocean appeared to be lactified. Could it be the effect of the moonlight? It could not be. The moon, barely 2 days old, was still invisible below the horizon and immersed in the rays of the sun. The whole sky, although bright and sunny, seemed dark by contrast to the milky whiteness of the water. Conseil could scarcely believe his eyes and asked me to explain this strange phenomenon. Fortunately, I could give him an answer. This is what is known as the Milky Sea, I told him, a vast stretch of white water often seen off the coast of Amboyna and in this area. But, asked Conseil, could Monsieur explain to me what produces this effect? I don't suppose this water has actually been changed into milk. No, Conseil. This whiteness that you find so strange is due to the presence of myriads of Infersonia, a sort of tiny luminous worm. This creature is gelatinous and colorless to look at, no thicker than a hair and no more than 1/100th of an inch long. Some of them attach themselves to another and form a white layer over the distance of several leagues. Several leagues! Exclaimed Conseil. Yes, lad, and don't try to guess the number of all those Infersia. It's impossible to do so. If I'm not mistaken, ships have sometimes sailed through these milky seas for more than 40 miles. I don't know whether Conseil heeded my advice, but he appeared to be plunged in deep meditation, doubtless trying to work out how many hundredths of an inch could be packed into an area 40 miles square. I continued observing this phenomena. For several hours, the Nautilus cruised through these milky white waters, and I noticed that it glided through these foamy waves silently, as if it were floating in one of those frothy eddies that can be seen when two currents, flowing in opposite directions, converge. Toward midnight, the sea suddenly resumed its normal color. But behind us, as far as the eye could see, the sky continued to reflect the white color of the waves, and for a long time it seemed to be illuminated by the delicate glimmers of the aurora borealis. What a beautiful image to end chapter 1 of part 2. Okay. So I suppose we shall just jump straight into chapter 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, 10 pages again. Okay. Same length as that first chapter. So, this next chapter is called Another Excursion with Captain Nemo. Okay. I'm excited to see what this excursion is going to be. Let's keep the book up here for a second. Okay. At midday on the 28th of January, when the Nautilus came up to the surface of latitude 9 degrees 4 north, I could see land about 8 miles to the west. First of all, I noticed a group of mountains that about 200 feet high, very peculiarly shaped. Then I went below, and when our bearings had been marked on the chart, I saw that the land in question was Ceylon, the pearl that hangs from the lower lobe of the Indian peninsula. I went into the library to look for a book about this island, which is one of the most fertile in the world, and found a volume of H.C. Stir, Ceylon and the Sinhalese. Returning to the saloon, I noted a few basic facts about Ceylon, which has been given so many different names throughout the ages. Its position, I learned, was between latitudes 5 degrees 55 and 9 degrees 45 north and longitude 79 degrees 42 and 82 degrees 4 east. Its circumference, 900 miles, and its surface area, 24,448 square miles, is somewhat less than that of Ireland. At that moment, Captain Nemo and his second-in-command appeared. The captain glanced at the chart and, turning to me, said, "Ceylon is famous for its pearl fisheries. Would you like to visit them, Monsieur Aronnax?" "I certainly would, Captain." "Very good. No problem about that. We can visit the fisheries, but we will not see the fishers. The annual harvest has not yet begun. But it doesn't matter. I will give orders to head to the Gulf of Mannar. We should get there sometime tonight." The captain then spoke a few words to his second-in-command, who immediately left the room. A few minutes later, the Nautilus returned to the deep, and the manometer showed a depth of 30 feet. Studying the chart, I looked for the Gulf of Mannar and found it at the 9th panel on the northwest coast of Ceylon. It was formed by a continuation of the waters off the little island of Mannar, and in order to reach the spot, we had to sail up to the north coast of Ceylon? Ceylon? I don't know. "Professor," Captain Nemo said, "there are pearl fisheries in the Bay of Bengal, in the Indian Ocean, in the seas of China and Japan, in South American waters, but the best pearls are all obtained in Ceylon. It's a bit early to go there, of course, but because the fishermen do not arrive in the Gulf of Mannar until March. With the 300 boats, they spend about 30 days in lucrative exploitation of the sea's treasure. Jesus. Each boat is manned by 10 oarsmen and 10 fishermen. The latter, divided into 2 groups, takes turns diving down to a depth of about 40 feet by means of a heavy stone which they hold beneath their feet, which is tied to the boat by means of a long rope." "You mean," I said, "they still use these primitive means?" "Yes, they still do," replied Captain Nemo. "Although these fisheries belong to the most industrialized people in the world, the English, who took possession in 1802 by the Treaty of Amiens. But I should have thought that diving equipment like that used by you would prove extremely useful in that work." "Indeed it would, because these poor fishermen cannot stay underwater very long. The Englishman Percival, in his description of his journey to Ceylon, mentions a Kafar who stayed down for 5 minutes without coming up for breath, but that seemed pretty incredible to me. However, I do know that some divers can last as long as 57 seconds, and the most skillful up to 87. But such cases are rare, and when these unfortunate men come back on board, bloody water pours from their ears and noses. I believe that the average time that pearl fishers can stay underwater is 30 seconds, during which they hasten to fill a small net with all the pearl-bearing oysters they can gather. In general, the fishermen do not live to be very old. Their sight grows weak, ulcers form on their eyes, sores on their bodies, and often they are seized with apoplexy and die in the water. Yes, I said, it's a melancholy task, and one that serves only to satisfy the caprices of fashion. But tell me, Captain, how many oysters can a boat fish up in a day? About 40 to 50,000. It is even said that in 1814, when the British government sent out some of its own divers, they collected 76 million oysters in 20 days. But are these fishermen at least adequately paid? I asked. Not really, Professor. At Panama, they only make $1 a week. More often, they get a penny for each oyster containing a pearl, but how many oysters contain no pearl at all? A penny for those poor people so their masters can get rich? How appalling. So, Professor, Captain Nemo said to me, your companions and yourself shall visit the Menhir oyster bed, and if by chance some early fisherman is already working there, we shall see how he does it. Good, Captain. By the way, Monsieur Arenal, I suppose you are not afraid of sharks? Sharks, I exclaimed. That struck me as being a great, gratuitous question, to say the least. Well, Captain Nemo repeated, I must admit, Captain, that I am not very well acquainted with that type of fish. We are used to them, rejoiced Captain Nemo, and in time you will be used to them. We will be armed, and on the way we might perhaps hunt a few. It's an excellent sport. I will see you early tomorrow, Professor. After saying this in his non-committal tone of voice, Captain Nemo left his saloon. If one were invited to go bear hunting in the Swiss mountains, one would probably say, good, tomorrow we'll be hunting bears. If one was invited to go lion hunting in the plains of Atlas or tiger hunting in the Indian jungle, one's reaction would probably be, ah, I see, so we're going to hunt for tigers or lions. But when one is invited to hunt sharks in their home grounds, one may well ask permission to think the matter over before accepting. Indeed, I passed my hand across my forehead, and I detected a few drops of cold sweat. Yes, let me think that matter over, I said to myself, and take our time. Hunting otter in underwater forests, as we did in the forests in the Isle of Crespo, that is all well and good. But to walk around the bottom of the sea, where one is fairly certain to run into sharks, that is quite another matter. I know that in some countries, particularly the Andaman Islands, the natives do not hesitate to attack sharks with a dagger in one hand and a noose in the other. I moved the camera. There we go. And I do know that many who confront these formidable creatures do not come back alive. What is more, I am not a native, and even if I were, I do not think a little hesitation on my part would be out of place. And so there I was, dreaming of sharks, of those huge jaws bristling with row upon row of teeth capable of cutting a man in two. I could already feel a pain in my back in anticipation. Moreover, I couldn't get over this nonchalant way in which the captain had issued his deplorable invitation. It had been said as if we were going to track down some harmless fox. I really love seeing this side of Arenal that's like a bit sarcastic and like generally emotional. about having to hunt sharks. I don't think it's very often that we get to see like perspective like this in the book, so I really enjoyed this page. All right, I thought. We shall see. Conceal certainly will not want to come, but that will give me an excuse to get out of this predicament. As for Ned Land, I was not so confident about them. The greater the danger, the more he was attracted to it. I went back to Sir's book and found I was turning the pages over mechanically without reading. All I could see on those pages were the open jaws of sharks. Just then, Conceal and the Canadian came in. They looked calm, even happy. They didn't realize what was in store for them. "Believe it or not, monsieur," said Ned Land, "Captain Nemo, may the devil take him, has just made us a very pleasant proposal." "Ah," I said, "you know." "If monsieur doesn't mind," replied Conseil, "the captain of the Nautilus has invited us, and monsieur, to visit the magnificent pearl fisheries of Ceylon. His invitation is most gracious, and he acted very much like a gentleman." "Did he give details about—" "No details, monsieur," replied the Canadian, "except to say that he has already spoken to you about this little excursion." "That is quite true, he did," I said, "but he didn't give you any details about— None at all, monsieur. But you'll be coming with us, won't you?" Oh yes, of course. I can see you're looking forward to this, Master Land." "Oh yes, it sounds very interesting indeed." "It might be very dangerous," I insinuated. "Dangerous? A simple visit to an oyster bed?" replied Ned Land, scornfully. Obviously, Captain Nemo had deemed it pointless to put the idea of sharks into the heads of my companions. I looked at them with a somewhat worried eye, as if they had already lost a limb. Should I warn them? Of course, but I did not know how to go about it. "Would monsieur please give us some details about pearl fishing?" Conseil asked. "Do you mean about the fishing itself?" I asked, "or about the attending circumstances?" "About the fishing," replied the Canadian. "It's always best to know the lay of the land before setting out." "Well, my friends, sit here and I will tell you all that I have just learned from the English author H.C. Sir." Ned Land and Conseil sat down on a divan, and the Canadian said, "Now, monsieur, just what is a pearl?" "Well, Ned," I replied, "it depends. For the poet, the pearl is a tear shed by the sea. For Orientals, it's a bead of solidified dew. For women, it is an oblong-shaped jewel they wear on their fingers, around their necks, on their ears. For the chemist, it's a mixture of phosphate and carbonate of lime with a little gelatin. And for the naturalist, it's an abnormal growth emanating from the organ that produces mother of pearl in certain mollusks." Division: mollusca, excuse me, said Conseil. Class: Acephalai. Order: Testaceae. "Precisely, my learned Conseil. Now, among these Testaceae, the abalone, the ear shell, the trinacinae, the pennae marinae, in short, all of these secatite mother of pearl, that blue, violet, or white substance that lines the inside of their shells, are also capable of producing pearls." "Mussels too?" asked the Canadian. "Yes, mussels in certain rivers of Scotland, Wales, Ireland, Saxony, Bohemia, and France." "Good. I'll bear that in mind in the future," replied the Canadian. "But," I continued, "the mollusk par excellence that secretes the pearl is the pearl oyster, that precious pentadine. The pearl is nothing but a nacreous concretion deposited in globular form, either attached to the shell or buried in the folds of the oyster. On the shell, it sticks fast. In the flesh, it is loose. But it always has for its kernel a small, hard substance, maybe a barren egg, or a sand grain, about which the pearly matter is deposited year after year in thin, concentric layers. Does one ever find more than one pearl in the same oyster? Asked Conseil. Yes, indeed. Some oysters have vertebral jewel bones. I have heard of an oyster, though I have some doubts in the matter, that contained no fewer than 150 sharks. 150 sharks? Cried Ned Land. Did I say sharks? I exclaimed. Of course I meant 150 pearls. Sharks wouldn't make sense. Indeed not, said Conseil. But would Monsieur now tell me how these pearls are extracted? They do so in various ways. When the pearls adhere to the shell, the fishermen may pull them off with pliers. But the most common way is to lay the pintadines out on mats made from a certain seaweed that covers the banks. They die in the open air, and after 10 days or so, they are in an advanced state of decomposition. They are dipped into tanks of seawater, opened, and washed. Now the extractors begin their work. First, they remove the layers of pearls, known in commerce as genuine silvers, bastard whites, and bastard blacks, which are packed in cases of 250 to 300 pounds each. Then they take the parenchyma, or the flesh of the oyster, boil it, and pull it through a sieve in order to catch the smallest pearls. And does the price of pearls vary according to size? Asked Conseil. Not only according to size, but also according to shape. Their water, that is to say, their color, and their luster, that is, the bright dapple sparkle that makes them so attractive to the eye. The most beautiful are called virgin pearls, or paragons. They are formed in the tissue of the mollusk. They are white, often opaque, but often they have the transparency of the opal. They are usually round or oval. The round make good bracelets. The ovals are made into pendants. Being more precious, they can be sold singly. Pearls that adhere to the shell are irregular in shape, and they are sold by weight. Finally, we come to those small pearls known as seed pearls. They are sold by measure, usually to be used in embroidery, for church ornaments, and the like. But surely the task of separating pearls according to their size must be long and difficult, suggested the Canadian. No, my friend, not at all. It is done by means of 11 sieves or strainers pierced with varying numbers of holes. Pearls that do not pass through a sieve, whose holes vary from 20 to 80 in number. Are of first quality. Those that do not have a drop through the sieve have 100 to 800 holes are second-class pearls. Finally, the pearls for which must use a sieve having from 900 to 1,000 holes are known as seed pearls. Very clever, said Conseil. So separation and classification of pearls is done mechanically. And could Monsieur tell us how much money is made with these oyster beds? According to Sir's book, I replied, the sea lion pearl fisheries yield the annual sum of these 3 million sharks. Francs. Monsieur means francs, Conseil corrected me. Yes, yes, of course, francs. I agreed. 3 million francs. But I believe that these fisheries no longer bring in as much as they used to, and the same can be said for the American fisheries, which, during the reign of Charles V, yielded 4 million francs, an income now reduced to two-thirds that amount. The overall proceeds from pearl fishing can at present be taken as 9 million francs. But, asked Conseil, aren't these some famous pearls that have been valued at a very high price? Yes, my lad, they are. It is said that Caesar offered Servilia a pearl valued at 120,000 francs in today's currency. And then there was an asterisk next to Servilia, and it says, daughter of Q. Servilius Caprio. She was married to M. Innius Brutus, by whom she became the mother of Brutus, who killed Caesar. Interesting. I've even heard it said, the Canadian remarked, that there was a lady in ancient times who drank pearls in vinegar. Cleopatra, replied Conseil. It must have tasted awful, interjected Ned Land. Yes, horrible, Ned, replied Conseil, but a little glass of vinegar, worth 1.5 million francs, is not to be despised. Ah, I'm sorry I didn't marry that woman, the Canadian murmured, absent-mindedly. Ned Land is the husband of Cleopatra, joked Conseil. I was all set to get married, Conseil, replied the Canadian seriously. It wasn't my fault if the affair didn't turn out well. I had even bought a pearl necklace for my fiancée, Kate Tender, and she went off and married another man. Believe it or not, the pearls in the necklace would have been passed through a large sieve, and yet I didn't pay more than $1.50 for it. But my good Ned, I laughed, those were just artificial pearls, hollow glass beads filled with mother-of-pearl-like substance. And is that stuff expensive? Asked Ned. It is very, very cheap. It is nothing but the silvery substance found on the scales of a fish called the bleak, preserved in ammonia. It has no value. Perhaps that's why Kate Tender married someone else, Ned Land remarked philosophically. However, I said, to get back to the subject of valuable pearls, I doubt if any king ever possessed a pearl superior to Captain Nemo's. You mean this one? Said Conseil, pointing to a magnificent jewel in a glass case. I am sure I shouldn't be wrong in valuing it as 2 million francs, Conseil interposed quickly. Yes, I said, 2 million francs, and I am sure that all it cost the captain was the trouble of bending down to pick it up. Ah, cried Ned Land, who knows whether our excursion tomorrow we may not come across another one like it? Pooh, cried Conseil, and why not? What good would millions of francs be to us on board the Nautilus? Mello! What's up, Mello? It's good to see you. Thanks for popping in. Thanks. It's funny because when I buzzed it, it felt so short, and now it's growing out, and I'm like, it feels long. But yeah, you're writing. Nice. I hope writing's going really, really well. Yeah, hope you're writing cool stories still. I'm doing well. I'm, I don't know, just working and working as much as I can on, our upcoming, album that's coming out with my band. So yeah, it's going well. Okay, good. You're still writing your desert story. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, man. Yeah, dude. Anyway, I'm gonna continue, but thanks for saying hi. Keep an eye out for the album, and I hope writing goes well. Of course, I said. Masterland is right. If ever we bring back to Europe or America a pearl worth a few millions, it would at least lend great authenticity to, and at the same time set a high price on, the story of our adventures. I can believe that, remarked the Canadian. But, said Conseil, who always reverted to the practical, is this pearl fishing dangerous? Oh, not at all, I replied immediately, especially if one takes certain precautions. And just what might the danger be? Asked Ned Land, swallowing a few mouthfuls of salt water. That is quite true, Ned. But, by the way, I said, trying to sound as matter of fact as Captain Nemo, are you afraid of sharks, Ned? Me? Replied the Canadian. A professional harpooner? Why, it's my job to laugh at them. It is no question, I said, of fishing for them with a hook and a swivel, hoisting them on the deck, hackling off their tails, slitting open their bellies, ripping out their guts, and throwing them into the sea. You mean it's a question of... Precisely. What? In the water? In the water. Well, you know, with a good harpoon, you see, monsieur, these sharks are pretty clumsily built. They have to turn over on their bellies to catch you, and in the meantime, Ned Land had a way of saying catch that sent cold shivers down one's spine. What about you, Conseil? What do you think of sharks? Well, said Conseil, I'll be quite frank with monsieur. It sounds more like it, I thought to myself. If monsieur is prepared to face the sharks, said Conseil, I see no reason why his faithful servant should not be by his side. Okay, that was the end of chapter 2. Yeah. Mello, if you're still here, send me your high-low kudos in the chat. Tell me the high of your day, the low of your day, and give kudos to someone from your day. I'd love to hear it. I just wanted to get through that chapter right there. But I really like the way that chapter ended. Like, I think this is the most fear we've ever seen from Arana. So, yeah, it's cool to see this side of him and like these little funny remarks about sharks. So, yeah, that was a good chapter. When night fell, I went to bed. I slept very badly. Sharks played an important part in my nightmares. I found that it was both just and unjust that the French word requin, shark, should be so close, etymologically speaking, to the word requiem. And then there's a footnote. It says, in English, the man-eater shark is called a requin, and some tropical sharks are known as requiem sharks. On the following day, at 4 a.m., I was awakened by a steward that the Captain Nemo had assigned to me. I rose quickly, dressed, and went along to the saloon. Captain Nemo was waiting. Monsieur Arana, he said, are you ready? I am ready. Will you follow me? And my friends, Captain? They are waiting for us. Aren't we going to put on our diving suits? I added. Not yet. I have taken the Nautilus too close to the coast, and we are still some distances from the Menhir Reef. But the dinghy is ready. It will have taken us to the exact spot and save us a long walk. Our divine suits are in the dinghy, and we shall put them on before beginning our excursion under the water. Captain Nemo led me to the center staircase leading to the platform. Ned and Conseil were waiting there, delighted at the proper prospect of a pleasure trip. 5 sailors of the Nautilus, their oars in place, were ready in the dinghy, which had been made fast alongside. The night was still dark. Layers of cloud covered the sky and allowed only an occasional glimpse of the stars. I cast my eye in the direction of land, but I saw only a dim line running along the 3/4 of the horizon from the southwest to the northwest. The Nautilus, which during the night had sailed up the west coast of Ceylon, was now to the west of the bay, or rather gulf, formed by this stretch of land and the Isle of Manir. There, beneath the dark waters, lay the Pentadine Reef, an inexplicable and inexhaustible pearl field that stretched out for more than 20 miles. Captain Nemo, Conseil, Ned Land, and I took up our places at the stern of the dinghy. The mate held the helm, and his 4 companions were at their oars. The rope was cast off and was set out. Doom! It has been a while. It's good to be back. I hope you're well. I hope you're very well. Throw your high-low kudos in the chat if you have it. Thanks for stopping in. The dinghy headed south. The oarsmen did not hurry. I noticed that their strokes, although pulled vigorously through the water, followed each other at intervals of 10 seconds. This was the usual timing adopted by most navies. When the boat was sliding through the water under its own momentum, oars up, liquid drops splashed crisply onto the dark surface of the waves like splatters of molten lead. A slight well from our sea caused the dinghy to roll gently, and little crests of water flapped against the bow. I've been very busy, but got some time now. Retail and Christmas. I've always wanted to read this. Well, I'm glad to be reading it to you now. Right now, the main character, who is a professor, is preparing to go pearl hunting in shark-infested waters with his assistant Conseil and a harpooner named Ned Land, with the captain of the submarine called Captain Nemo. But I'm glad to hear you've been busy. I guess. I mean, hopefully you're not too busy. Okay. We remained silent. What was Captain Nemo thinking about? Perhaps that the land we were approaching, which he found too near, unlike Ned, who doubles found it too far. As for Conseil, he had come merely out of curiosity. Toward 5:30, the first tints of the horizon began to give definite shape to the upper line of the coast. Fairly flat to the east, it broadened out toward the south. We were still 5 miles off, but the shoreline mingled with the misty waters. Between us and the shore, the sea was deserted. Not a boat, not a diver. A profound silence reigned over a meeting place of the pearl fishers. As Captain Nemo had said to me, we had arrived in these parts a month too soon. At 6 o'clock, day broke with the suddenness that is characteristic of tropical regions, and there is no real dawn or twilight. The sun's rays pierced the banks, clouds on the eastern horizons, and the radiant sun now quickly fell into the sky. No, it's all quiet now, so I can spend time in streams and stuff. Yay! Okay, good. Yay! I'm glad to hear that. Glad you're having a restful time now. May we all be so lucky. I could see the land distinctly, with trees scattered here and there. The dinghy approached the Isle of Mannar, which appeared to the south. Captain Nemo stood up and inspected the sea. At a signal from him, the anchor was dropped, and the chain was not allowed to run far, for the sea here was not more than 3 or 4 feet deep. This was one of the shallowest points of the Pindadine sea bank. The dinghy swung around in the ongoing tide. "Here we are, Monsieur Aronnax," said Captain Nemo. "Do you see that narrow bay? In a month, it will be crowded with boats of the exploiters, and these waters will be veritable hunting ground for bold divers who will rummage the very bottom of these waters. The bay is well suited for this sort of fishing. It is sheltered from the strong winds, and the sea is generally calm, all of which is very helpful to divers. Let us put on our diving suits and begin our excursion." Uni starts in February, so, hope you're at least being productive and doing things you love, like your music. Oh, that's so sweet. Thanks for thinking of me, Doom. I am making a lot of progress in our music, and we're making really great strides for our album that will be out in February. So I'm really excited, and we're finally at a place where all of our songs are like just about finished. We just have to record everything and like mix and master and stuff. But I'm really stoked about putting out this album. Yeah, you will. I mean, I don't know if it's really studying music. It is a rock album, but but maybe if you can study to rock music, it's gonna be a perfect study album for you. I write like a riff or two, then forget. I understand that feeling. Um, but yeah, it's, the writing is happening. And I'll get back to more productivity streams very soon. Probably, I don't know, maybe tomorrow. We'll see how my morning looks. I'll give you an answer on that right now. Yeah. Might be able to stream tomorrow morning. Anyway, I'm going to continue reading. But thanks for the support. I really appreciate it, Doom. And I'll let all my followers know when the new album is out. I'm going to be so annoying about it, actually. Yeah, nope. Interrupting is encouraged. All good. Okay. "Here we are, Monsieur Aronnax," said Captain Nemo. Oh, I think I already read this part. Okay. I remained silent, but I could not help looking at those waters with apprehension. I began to don my diving suit with help of the sailors on board. Captain Nemo and my 2 companions did likewise. None of these men of the Nautilus was to accompany us on this new excursion. In the short while we were imprisoned up to our necks in the rubber clothing, with our air tanks strapped to our backs, there was no sign of the Rumknorf lights. Before placing my head in the copper helmet, I mentioned this to the captain. "Lights would be useless," replied the captain. "We shall not be going very deep, and the rays of the sun will be sufficient to light up our path. Besides, it's not wise to carry an electric lantern here. Its brilliancy might well attract some dangerous denizens of these waters." As Captain Nemo said that, I turned to Ned and Conseil, but my 2 friends had already put on their metal helmets, and I could neither hear nor answer me. I had one more question to put to the captain. "And our weapons?" I asked him. "Our guns?" "Guns? What for?" "Mountain folk." My My book light died. No. It's okay. I can see without it. I'll just strain my eyes. Guns? What for? Mountain folk face the bear with a knife alone. And isn't steel surer than lead? Here is a strong knife. Put it in your belt and let us go. Do we have a lamp? I have one over there, but I don't really want to. You know what I could do? It's not a great source of light, but I could turn on my lava lamp, Gabe. So let me do that real quick. Hold on. Here, so you can see Gabe. There he is. Gabe has been in my life for a really long time. And he's a really old man, Gabe. And he really takes his time with lighting up. And I love him dearly. You do have to get yourself a lava lamp. They're great. Okay. I love that he has a name too. I looked at my friends. They were armed like us, but Ned was also brandishing an enormous harpoon, which he had put in the dinghy before we left the Nautilus. Then, following the captain's example, I followed the heavy copper sphere to be placed over my head, and our air tanks were immediately turned on. A moment later, the sailors put us over the side, one after the other, and we found ourselves standing on even sand in 4 or 5 feet of water. Captain Nemo gestured with his hand. We followed him down a gentle incline and disappeared under the waves. Once in the water, my fears and apprehensions vanished. I became surprisingly calm again. The ease which I could move increased my confidence, and the strange surroundings captivated my imagination. The sun rays were already penetrating the waters, and their light was enough for us to distinguish even the smallest objects. After walking for 10 minutes, we were in the depth of about 15 feet, and the bottom leveled off. Schools of strange fish of the genus of Monopterapedidae, resembling snipe in the marsh, rose at our feet. These fish have no fins except their tail. I recognized the Javanese, a real serpent, about a yard long, with its livid belly. It might easily be confused with a concert eel, but for the gold stripes along its sides. Of Astromenetid genus, these bodies are very flat and oval. I noticed some of them most brilliant hues, carrying their dorsal fin like a scythe. These edible fish, dried and pickled, made an excellent dish known as carawade. I saw tranquibars belonging to the Apsiphoridal genus, whose bodies are covered with a scaly armor made up of 8 longitudinal sections. In the meanwhile, the rising sun lit the depths more and more intensely. The sea bottom changed slowly as we went. From fine sand, we came to an embankment of round-edged rocks, which was covered by a carpet of mollusks and zoophytes. Amid the sparkling of these 2 species, I noticed Placinae with flimsy and irregular shells, a sort of oyster peculiar to the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, some orange Lucinae with rounded shells, the all-like Terabellum, some fishy Plerpura with provided the Nautilus with an admirable dive, horned munices up to 6 inches long, which stood up under the waves like hands ready to seize you. Cornigerous tubinale, bristling with spikes. Lingulae hyants. Oh my gosh. Sometimes there are sections of these books that are just, this book in particular, that's just like, I've already said this so many times, but it's just like nautical term, nautical term, nautical term. And I've never seen these words in my life and I don't know how they're pronounced. So my apologies if I'm like stumbling a little bit. Okay. Which stood up under the waves like hands ready to seize you. Cornigerous tubulinae, bristling with spikes. Lingulae hyants. Anatinae pyres, which were slightly luminous. And finally, oculines with magnificent fans, which form under the richest tree-like growths of the sea. All the sailors are going to be annoyed. Yeah, if you're a sailor in the chat, my apologies. In the midst of these living plants, and beneath the arbors of hydrophytes, swam legions of clumsy artiflates, especially the toothed ranaray, whose shell was like a slightly rounded triangle, the burgee, peculiar to these waters, and the loathsome parmenopes, very repugnant to the eye. Another animal, no less hideous, which I met on several occasions, was the giant crab mentioned by Darwin. Nature has given this creature the instinct and the strength to feed on coconuts. It climbs trees that grow on the shore, knocks down coconuts which break open when they fall, and opens them with its powerful claws. Here, beneath the clear waters, it could have been seen moving with incredible speed, while errant turtles of the species frequently found along the coasts of Malabar clambered slowly among the scattered rocks. Okay. Towards 7 o'clock, we finally reached the banks where pearl oysters reproduce by the millions. These precious mollusks were climbing to rocks attached to them by a brown-colored byssus, which prevents them from moving. For this reason, I need to read in a British accent now, don't I? Them from moving. For this reason, these oysters are inferior to mussels, which have some freedom of movement, however limited. The Melagrina pearl oyster, whose valves are much the same size, has a round, thick shell and a corrugated exterior. Some of these shells are flecked and streaked with greenish grooves radiating from the top down. These were the young oysters. These oysters, 10 years older, have a rugged black shell and measured as much as 6 inches in diameter. Captain Nemo pointed to that enormous mass of pearl oysters, and I realized that this was, indeed, an inexhaustible mine, for nature's creative powers, it seemed, were greater than the power of man to destroy. Ned Land, faithful to this destructive instinct in man, was quickly filling a mesh net with the finest specimens. But we could not stop. This had to follow the captain, who appeared to be proceeding along paths known only to him. The bottom rose noticeably, and sometimes I could raise my arm above the surface of the sea. Then the level of the bank would drop suddenly again. We often walked around high rocks tapered like pyramids. In the dark recesses of those rocks there lurked giant crustaceans, poised on their claws like war machines, staring at us with glaring eyes, and around our feet crawled Maiandae, Arisae, and Andalae, extending their long antennae and tentacles outward. Just then, a vast grotto appeared before us, hollowing out a picturesque mass of rocks covered with all the flora of the sea. At first, it seemed to be total darkness. The rays of the sun appeared to be dimmed by degrees, and the light absorbed by the sea disappeared beneath the waters. Captain Nemo went in. We followed. My eyes soon became accustomed to the vague darkness inside. I could make out the contorted and whimsical curves of the valves, supported by natural pillars resting on a granite foundation, which reminded me of the heavy columns seen in the Tuscan architecture. Why was this inscrutable guide taking us into the crypts in the depths of the water? I was soon to know. Alright, I think that was enough British. It's pretty spot on. Yeah? Okay. I could need a spot of tea. A spot of tea? You could be fooled, really? Well, that's really nice to hear. Thank you. Thank you, Doom. I'm gonna take a spot of tea right now. Alright. I'm gonna go back to Pennsylvania, New Jersey accent, Juana. But thank you. That was fun. After descending a fairly steep slope, our feet touched the bottom of a sort of circular pit. There, Captain Nemo stopped, and with a gesture of his hand, pointed to an object that I had not noticed. It was an oyster of extraordinary size, a gigantic clam that could have been made into a holy water basin, large enough to hold a little lake of holy water, a basin whose diameter was no more than 7 feet, and larger than the one of the saloon of the Nautilus. Pip pip. I approached this phenomenal mollusk. It was attached by its byssus to a block of granite, and it was growing and living alone in the quiet waters of the grotto. I guessed its weight to be around 650 pounds. Such an oyster would have some 30 pounds of meat, and only a gargantuan stomach could digest a dozen or so. Can you imagine eating 30 pounds of oyster? Like one oyster, that's 30 pounds of like meat on the inside. I like oysters, I really do, but that would be wild. Obviously, Captain Nemo had already known the existence of this valve. It wasn't the first time that he had paid it a visit, and I imagined he had taken us there just to show us a curious marvel of nature. But I was mistaken. Captain Nemo had a special reason for wanting us to see this creature was coming along. The 2 valves of the mollusks were partly open, and the captain went up to it and inserted his dagger between the valves to prevent them from closing. Then, with his hand, he lifted the covering membrane, which formed a protective layer for the animal. I hear they are slimy, and you don't need to chew, or am I wrong? No, it is kind of like that. It's weird, like when they get served to you, they're like freshly like shucked open. So they're still kind of alive a little bit. And you have to take the lemon juice to like properly kill it, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, you like put lemon juice on it, you put like a little hot sauce or like cocktail sauce if you're into it. And then you just kind of tip it into your mouth and eat it, and you can chew, but a lot of people just swallow it straight down. Yeah, a lot of people hate oysters, and a lot of people love oysters, and they are very slimy. There, between the foliage-like folds, I saw a loose pearl the size of a coconut. Its globular shape, its perfect clarity, its magnificent luster, made it a jewel of inestimable value. Overwhelmed by my curiosity, I stretched out my hand to grasp it, to weigh it, to feel it. But the captain stopped me, indicated he did not want it touched, and withdrawing his dagger, allowed the two halves to close quickly. I'm gonna chew it if I try it. I love octopus. Well, in Greece, I had octopus. How much is that worth? A few clams? Octopus is great. I like octopus too. That's so cool. It must have been delicious in Greece. Now I realized what he had in mind. By leaving this pearl inside this creature, he was permitting it to grow slowly but indefinitely. Each year, the secretion of the mollusk would add additionally concentric layers. Only he knew the grotto where the most admirable fruit of nature was maturing. Only he was cultivating this fruit, so to speak, so that someday he could display it on his precious collection. Perhaps following the example of the Chinese and the Persians, he had been breeding the pearl by placing pieces of glass or metal under the fleshy fold of this creature. In any case, compromising this pearl with those which were already in the captain's collection, I estimated its value at 10 million francs, at least. But this, however, was only a marvel of nature, not a piece of jewelry to be worn by feminine ears. It was just a bit too heavy for that, I thought. Our visit to the opulent Tridacne was over. Captain Nemo left the grotto, and we climbed back to the oyster bank, where the clear waters were still undisturbed by the work of the divers. We have like 4 pages to go. We made our way, each strolling, stopping, or wandering off in somewhat various directions. I was no longer troubled by those fears that my imagination had so ridiculously exaggerated. The bottom of the sea kept rising toward the surface of the water, and I was soon walking in 3 or 4 feet of water with my head out of the water. Conseil walked up to me and, putting his helmet beside mine, raised his eyes in a friendly greeting. But this high plateau lasted for only a very short distance, and we were soon back in the deep waters. 10 minutes later, Captain Nemo stopped suddenly. I thought he had stopped in order that we might retrace our steps. Not at all. With a gesture, he ordered us to squat down beside him at the bottom of a deep crevice. He pointed with his hand in a certain direction, and I looked very carefully to see what he saw. 15 feet from me, a shadow appeared, which dropped to the bottom of the sea. The disturbing thought of sharks flashed through my mind, and I soon realized I was mistaken. We were not being troubled by sea monsters. It was a man, an Indian diver, a poor devil, no doubt, who had come to gather fruit before the harvest. I could see the bottom of his boat anchored a few feet above his head. He dived and rose again and again. A stone held between his feet was tied with a rope and connected to the boat. This helped him to get to the bottom more rapidly. This was his only implement. Once down to the bottom, it was about 15 feet of water. He dropped to his knees and filled his bag with oysters, picked at random. Then he would rise, empty his sack, pull up the stone, and start over again. Every trip took no longer than 30 seconds. The diver did not see us. The shadow of a rock hid us. Besides, how could that poor Indian imagine that men, beings like him, were there beneath the water, watching him and observing every detail of his labors? Several times he went up and down, but he could not bring up more than 10 oysters at a time because he had to rip them from the rocks from which they were, firmly attached. And how many of those oysters, for which he was risking his life, contained no pearls. I kept watching him very closely. He worked with speed and precision. For half an hour, no danger seemed to threaten him. I was somewhat taken by the spectacle that the interesting manner of pearl fishing was suddenly, while the Indian was on his knees, I saw him make a gesture of terror, get up quickly, ready to spring to the surface. I understood that terror. A gigantic shadow appeared above the unfortunate diver. It was a shark of huge dimensions, moving speedily toward him, and his jaws wide open and a fire in his eyes. I knew a shark would show up eventually. I was mute with horror, completely paralyzed. With a vigorous blow of his fin, the voracious monster shot toward the Indian, who jumped to one side to avoid the shark's bite. But he could not avoid the monster's tail, which struck him on the chest and threw him flat on the ocean floor. The scene had scarcely lasted more than a few seconds. Then the animal, turning over, came back, ready to cut the poor man in two, when I saw Captain Nemo, who was next to me, suddenly get up and, dagger in hand, make straight for the monster, ready to fight it, hand to hand. Just as the shark was ready to snap the unhappy diver in two, he made his new adversary, and turning over, made straight for him. I can see in the posture of Captain Nemo, bracing himself, and with admirable sang-froid, had waited for the formidable enemy. And when the monster lunged at him, he sidestepped with incredible speed, avoided the jaws of the animal, and plunged his dagger into the belly of the monster. The battle was not over, however. A terrible struggle followed. The shark had roared, as it were. Blood poured from its wounds. The waters turned red, and through darkened waters I no longer saw anything. Nothing, until a clear spot appeared in the water. When I saw the intrepid captain holding fast to one of the fins, still struggling hand to hand with the monster. Yeah, no problem. I hope you're enjoying it. Riddling with blows of his dagger the belly of the enemy, but unstable to reach his heart. The shark churned the water so furiously that the rocking almost upset me. I would have liked to help the captain, but paralyzed with horror, I was unable to move. I looked on with dread. I saw the battle take a new turn. The captain fell on the ground, brought down by the enormous weight of the creature. The shark's jaws opened wide like a searing machine, and it would have been all over the captain if Ned Land, with the speed of lightning, had not rushed toward and struck it with his harpoon. The waves were a mass of blood. The shark beat them with an indescribable fury. Ned Land, however, had not missed. This was the monster's dead battle. Struck to the heart, it struggled with frightful convulsions, whose shocks knocked Conseil down. In the meanwhile, Ned Land had extricated the captain, who, apparently unhurt, went over to the Indian, cut the rope tying him to the rock, took him in his arms, and with one vigorous kick of the heel, brought him to the surface. Saved by the miracle, the three of us followed suit, and in a moment we reached the diver's boat. The captain's first care was to bring that poor fellow back to life. I did not know whether he would succeed. I had hopes, however, since the man had not been down very long, he might not have been killed by the monster's tail. Fortunately, with both Conseil and the captain working vigorously to revive him, he slowly regained his consciousness and opened his eyes. What must have been his surprise or his fear to see 4 large copper helmets bending over him. But above all, what must have thought the Captain Nemo pulled a bag of pearls from a pocket of his diving suit and put them in his hand. With a trembling hand, the poor Indian accepted these alms that the man of the sea, but his startling eyes indicated that he did not know To what supermen he owed both his life and his fortune. At a sign from the captain, we returned to the oyster bed and, following the path already traversed, arrived, in about half an hour, at an anchor that held the dinghy. Last page. Once on the boat, with the aid of the sailors, we took off our heavy helmets. Captain Nemo's first words were addressed to the Canadian. "Thank you, Master Land." "I was repaying a debt, that's all," answered Ned Land. A smile appeared on the captain's face. That was all. "Back to the Nautilus," he said. The boat sped over the waves. A few minutes later, he came across the floating body of the shark. By the black coloring on the tips of its fins, I could classify it as belonging to the terrible Melanopotrian of the Indian Ocean. It is more than 25 feet long, and its enormous mouth occupied more than a third of its body. It was an adult, as could be determined by the 6 rows of teeth arranged in the form of an isosceles triangle in the upper jaw. Conseil looked at it from a scientific point of view, and I am certain that he classified it correctly as belonging to a species of cartilaginous fish, class Chronicalithes, with fixed gills, other Salaceae, and the genus Squally. While I was looking at the inert mass, a dozen of those voracious melanopterns suddenly appeared around the boat. But without paying attention to us, they fell upon that floating carcass that fought for every shred. Science, literally. 1/3 mouth, gotta be like 2/3 stomach. Literally. At 8:30, we were back on the Nautilus. Once there, I took time thinking about that excursion to the Minar beds. 2 observations came clearly to mind. One about the incomparable courage of Captain Nemo, and other, his devotion to a human being, a representative of the race from which he was fleeing beneath the sea. Whatever one might say, that strange man had not yet succeeded in completely killing his own heart. When I called his attention to this, he answered, somewhat moved, "That Indian, Monsieur le Professeur, lives in the land of the oppressed, and I belong, and to my last breath will always belong to the land." Interesting that Captain Nemo says he belongs to the land and not the sea. Okay, that was the end of chapter 3. So let's open Storygraph and figure out what percentage of the book we made it through. But that was a good little section there. We made it to 239. Which means we're officially 50% of the way through the book. Hell yeah. Amazing. Doesn't he know they named a fish after him? He's a human, so yeah, I know. It's so funny that so many kids are just saying like Nemo, Nemo, and like they don't know that Nemo is like named after Captain Nemo from the book. Anyway, well, thank you so much for tuning into the stream. I really appreciate you being here, and I know Alan's not here anymore, but huge thank you for him for raiding and bringing some friends here to the stream. It is a good one to fall asleep to. That's what I'm here for. Gonna see if there's anyone. Oh yeah, Neff is streaming. Okay, I'm gonna send you guys to Neff. He's reading as well, so it'll be good to move on to him if you want another place to have someone reading to you. And yeah, have a great night. Thank you for tuning in. Bye.